Corporate America's descent into woke madness has been a process years in the making, right? It's like it's reached a crescendo. But the continued backlash, a sustained backlash against brands like Bud Light and Target has many asking, could we be nearing a tipping point? I believe we are. You know, even if corporate America does not revert to traditional conservative values, could this sustained backlash cause other brands to think twice before pushing an agenda or even choosing a neutral path? Joining me now to discuss this is Steve Soukup. He's the vice president and publisher of the Political Forum and the author of The Dictatorship of Woke Capital. Steve, welcome back to Washington Watch. Good to see you.
Thank you for having me, Tony. I appreciate it.
So we've seen the headlines involving Bud Light. I mean, they're down about 30% in their sales, and more recently, Target. Tell us how this relates to your stakeholder theory.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Stakeholder capitalism developed. The original stakeholder theory was developed in the late 1960s, early 1970s as a way to help business owners, as a way to help them understand that there will be competing interests in running a business and that it's their responsibility to take care of and to listen to all of these competing interests in order to keep their company afloat. That sometimes customers and the locality where you work might have conflicting interests. Occasionally, workers and customers might have conflicting interests. And the idea was to teach these business managers how best to deal with this. In the late 1970s and the early 1980s, that shifted, and it became business theorists took a more normative, a more ethical or moral modeling approach to stakeholder capitalism, and they decided that what needed to happen was for businesses to push a social purpose, and although that's been called stakeholder capitalism, that is what we understand as stakeholder capitalism today, that generally tends to pit businesses against their customers in certain circumstances, as we're seeing with Bud Light and with Target. That the idea of making concessions to social justice stakeholders puts them in real jeopardy with the stakeholders that matter, their shareholders and their capitals, and their customers.
So when you look at what's happening with Target, Bud Light, as I mentioned earlier, I think we're at a tipping point. I've not seen this type of sustained backlash from customers. You know, Target, this is not Target's first time to wade into this. I mean, back in 2016, they opened up their dressing rooms to biological men to go into women's dressing rooms. You know, they charged head on into it, and there was some pushback. But this seems to be different. I think America has had time to process all this transgender stuff, and they don't like what they see. This is much different than the earlier LGB, or what, lesbian and the gay, the homosexuals. This is different with the transgender. This is more than what, this is a bridge too far for many Americans. And so from your standpoint, are you seeing this in a different light? I mean, have we reached a new point?
I think we have reached a new point, and I think you're correct that it distinguishes the trans movement from the gay and lesbian and bisexual movement that was taken on earlier, 2 decades earlier. Andrew Sullivan, whom you may know as a openly gay, conservative-ish writer, had a column just a couple weeks ago making the case that the trans movement is in fact about the erasure of gay men, gay women, and straight women. That it is not about sexuality so much as it is about power. And I think that resonates with a lot of American people, that this is not about acceptance. This is not about diversity. This is, in fact, strictly about power. And I think that a lot of Americans understand that and are reacting to that.
So has this, this philosophy, the stakeholder theory, that many businesses have committed themselves to, are they, I mean, are they stuck to this, or do they not know how to get out of it? Because this clearly is not working out well for them when it comes to the trans movement.
Well, in fact, a lot of them are stuck. And part of it is the fact that they have made agreements with pressure groups like the Human Rights Commission, which is a gay rights organization that pushes a lot of this agenda. And if they push back at all, if they try and slow down the advance of HRC's agenda, then they find themselves in trouble. What you're seeing with Bud Light right now, for example, is that Anheuser-Busch had a perfect rating from HRC on their in their annual ratings for how well they treat gay employees, gay customers, et cetera. But simply by apologizing for the Dylan Mulvaney issue, Bud Light or Anheuser-Busch is now going to suffer. They're going to have their ratings docked by the HRC, and Target is at risk of having the same thing happen to them. Target has been one of the HRC's favorite corporations and a financial sponsor of the HRC for years. But simply by reacting to customers and doing what the customers asked, Target is going to get dinged by the HRC on their next ratings. And that's a real problem for some of these corporate executives. They don't know how to handle this. They're really in a difficult spot.
So, Steve, they're going to get hit by both sides because they're dropping in their sales, and now they have the left, who they've been trying to appease, saying you haven't appeased us enough, and so we're going to ding you with our ratings. So let's talk just a moment. What has been the financial impact on Bud Light? Talk about it in reality. What do those numbers mean?
That's a huge number. I saw a story earlier today that said Bud Light is selling, or Anheuser-Busch is selling Bud Light for 14 cents an ounce, or 14 cents a can, that they can't get rid of the stuff. You have distributors, franchise distributors, who are turning in their franchise credentials because they can no longer make a living distributing Anheuser-Busch products. It's not just Bud Light, it's other Anheuser-Busch products that are suffering, and it's having an enormous impact. This is pretty much unprecedented in American consumer behavior, and it's really caught a lot of people off guard and has done a lot of damage to some of these companies. So, Target, how's the pushback affected Target financially? Well, Target is struggling as well. Target has had their roughest week in the markets in probably a decade. Shareholders are selling, saying that we don't want to be a part owner of a corporation that cares less about us than it does about pressure groups. And so they're making a move out of the Target stock, which is very important and very destructive to the Target name brand and to the its overall presence in the capital markets. So this has been really, really problematic for them. So, Steve, as we move into June, which is a Pride Month, where we go into these stores and we see all the rainbow flags and all the stuff, where increasingly we've seen these corporations in the face of their customers pushing this. Could some of those CEOs be stepping back a little bit and maybe kind of downplaying some of that celebration? I think that a lot of them will probably be very concerned about what's going to happen. Again, they run the risk of dealing with Churchill's Crocodile. Churchill said that an appeaser is the one that the crocodile eats last. And these people have spent the last several decades appeasing a lot of activist groups, and if they step back from this, they're going to get punished. That's the crocodile is going to gobble them up. So I don't think that they have much hope of salvaging this next month. That they're damned if they do, damned if they don't. What do you see going forward? I mean, are we again going back a new era, a tipping point where people feel empowered to push back against corporations that are working in a way that is counter to their values? I mean, I think people would be happy. I know personally I would. If people just look, if you make coffee, make coffee. If you if you sell widgets, sell widgets. Don't get involved in all this stuff. Just do business. Yeah, I think the public-facing portion of what I've taken to calling woke capital is really as you say, at a tipping point. The issue, of course, is going to be what happens behind the scenes, what happens in capital markets, what happens with asset management pressure on these corporations, what happens with ESG rating services, and all of the stuff that happens sort of behind the scenes. But yeah, I think that corporations are probably going to have to take a much more delicate approach on the public-facing aspects of this.
I mean, when you take everything that's happening in totality, I mean, when you look at the policies coming from this administration that is in line with a lot of these woke corporations, it looks like they're walking in lockstep, where you've got the Biden administration pushing the transgender agenda through public education, through the healthcare systems. You know, people have just had enough. I think, you know, again, going back to the LGBTQ, you know, those are letters that don't go together, actually. When you look at the competing interest of those groups, it's the only reason they're together is because they have a common enemy. But I think as people begin to realize that the transgender is a liability, I don't know if they're at a point where they can dump that from the LGBTQ, but it's not something that the American people, I think, are warming up to. In fact, the more they see it and they see their children being indoctrinated with this and they see this being pushed in every store that they walk into, I think many people are fearful of what the future looks like.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think that's probably an accurate description, that the aggressiveness and the inflexibility of the trans movement has put a lot of people off, a lot of people who have otherwise been very supportive. It's a much more difficult case to make that, you know, being transgendered is just like, you know, being anybody else. It's a much scientifically and socially, it's a much more difficult case, and it makes for a very difficult reckoning for the movement, which has been pushing very hard and really can't defend itself anywhere nearly as well as the gay and lesbian movement. So
your advice, Steve, final word for you. I'll give you the final word. Your advice to businesses?
My advice to businesses would be to eschew the entire woke capital ESG complex. To say, look, we're not playing that game anymore. We're not political. What we want to do is make the best widgets we can. We want to be the best business that we possibly can, do the best for our employees, do the best for our customers, and especially do the best for our shareholders. That they should be getting out of the game of politics altogether.
Wow, what a crazy idea! Actually, to do business, that would be interesting and welcomed too. Steve, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tony.